Can you hear me now? Okay. It's so quiet.
Well, this one seems to be.
We're all good to go. Okay. Hey, everyone. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors meeting. It is Thursday, August 20th, and we do have a quorum present. Welcome, everyone. First on the agenda is to look at the agenda and approve it. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved, Rich.
So moved, Rich, seconded by Julie. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, raise your hands. And that did pass unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Next, we'll move on to public comment. Is there anyone in the gallery that would like to make a public comment this evening? I can't see. And if there's no one in the gallery, Deb, is there anyone online? Okay, very good. That takes care of public comment. Thank you, everyone. And then we will move on to general announcements. Are there any general announcements? Seeing none. Thank you very much. We're just ticking along here. Next is our consent agenda. Would somebody like to move that into the record? So moved by Julie, seconded by Simi. All those in favor, raise your hands. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. We have an emergent item tonight. We have our draft public hearing, and I'm going to read from a script because my memory is not that great. In accordance with the Budget Hearings of Local Governments Act, local units are required to hold a public hearing on a proposed budget. I will need a motion to suspend the regular board meeting and move to open the public meeting. Would someone like to make a motion?
Kathleen, I think that's after her presentation.
Oh, sorry about that. You're right. I was supposed to have.
You can do it in.
I can do it either way. It doesn't matter. Okay, then we'll go ahead and just keep doing it then. Apologies. Would anyone like to make a motion for the budget hearing? Seconded by Simi. All those in favor, raise your hands. Thank you so much. So Dina is going to come forward and give us a draft budget presentation. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Madam Chair, we seem to have a procedural irregularity. Would it be acceptable to the board during the public hearing process for Dina to make her presentation? Because I think you then have to, the public hearing is a second public comment period specifically about the budget. And
I can do the presentation now. But we didn't need a second. That would have been nice to know for you. And I'm so sorry. So now we need a motion to close the public hearing.
I apologize. I would advise you to close the public hearing, listen to Dina's presentation, and then open a new public hearing.
Right, that's what I was trying to do. We need a motion to close the public hearing.
Thank you. Our apologies.
By Julie, second. Travis, all those in favor. Lovely procedures. All right, Ms. Dina, we have our draft budget presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Can you see the presentation? Thanks. Okay, so sorry for the procedural hiccup, but I'm happy to present a draft of the budget this evening. Here's our agenda. We're going to have a brief introduction, give some more information about the operating and capital budgets as part of the overall budget, do a summary and financial outlook, conclusion and next steps, and then do a public hearing, which is required by state law. So as I've mentioned before, I just like to level set us all with how the budget process starts and goes. The budget process is much longer than the summer. It really starts early in the fiscal year where the staff looks at and continues to look at the board's strategic goals and develop a corporate business plan that aligns with that, and then we develop a budget for execution that is in alignment with the business plan priorities. The most active phase of the actual annual budgeting process happens typically between April or May and September, where we ask for the board's approval of the budget. This is our process, and we've been going through it together all summer. So I'm excited to show you that we're almost to the end. This is our last formal main presentation before we ask for your approval at the end of September. But we do still have some staff work, as you can see, throughout the months, and we'll be presenting additional information as needed throughout the month of September for committee meetings and such. And of course, tonight is a very important night because we do an official public hearing where we ask for public information or feedback on the budget so that we can have a meaningful incorporation of those comments if there are any in the budget process. So with that, I want to move into talking about some highlights of the operating and capital draft budget. Very similar to last month, no major swings in our main priorities or our highlights. The budget is prepared in accordance with maintaining our current service levels that we have promised to deliver. We have strong income growth. We are not planning any fare changes for this budget. We are managing our cost pressures, and we are presenting tonight and will be presenting a balanced budget for approval in September. Some more details on the operating. As I said, we have an operating budget that is balanced. I would like to point out that revenues are greater than or equal to expenses. They're just slightly greater than. And a majority of the revenue that we get currently is through property taxes and state operating assistance. And the majority of the expenses, as you might expect, are of more than a majority, is direct funding for transportation. One thing that I wanted to kind of give a little more information out about, I'm going to talk a little bit about revenues and then I'm going to move into expenses, and then we'll talk about the capital budget. So for revenues, one of our key revenues is passenger fares. And in the budget, there is, if you may have noticed, there is a slight decrease in passenger fare revenue. And the reason for that is that's a budget to budget comparison. So we are expecting that ridership is going to grow slightly in 2027. It's just that we took a little dip in 2026 of where we are today. And you can see in the graph that's presented, the bar chart for FY26, the light blue part of that bar chart represents what was budgeted for 2026. And the dark blue is closer to what we're expecting the actuals to be for 2027 or for 2026. So moving into 2027, we are showing a slight growth in ridership, and we are showing a slight growth in revenue, but there's a budgetary decline, and I just wanted to explain that because it might be anti-intuitive when you think about why our revenue is going down and when we expect passengers to grow. Another major source of funding for our budget is our LBO funding. We've talked a lot about that. It's called state operating assistance as well. We use them interchangeably, and I think you may remember seeing this chart. I present it a lot because it's a nice correlation between what happens with the funding and how much funding we actually get as a percentage of our revenue, or as our percentage of our eligible expenses from the state. What you're really seeing here is a long history of receiving approximately 30% of eligible expenses from the state. We've talked about this before, but revenue has been growing by the state. MDOT has been a champion for transit, and we are showing that here. You can see the revenues are growing every year. However, the percentage doesn't necessarily increase. So I just want to demonstrate here that while revenues grow, expenses are growing probably at a little bit of a faster rate, and not just for TheRide. It's for all transit agencies in the state. So remember that the funding that we get as a whole from the CTF has to be split for all transit agencies in the state. So as expenses go up, the percentage can still stay the same. That's what we're seeing here. But we're sort of made whole to where we have been in the past, really close to 30%, which is nice for us because we were really expecting last year that it could be much lower. So we're grateful that the state has stepped up and funded this with the budget from last year. Property tax revenues are also a major source of funding for our budget, as you all know. This graph is just meant to kind of explain what's going on with the growth in property tax revenues at a very high level. They are growing, and what you're seeing in the orange line is the assessment changes from year to year that reflect the revenues in our budget. So for the past few years, we've seen significant growth above what the average was. The average that we would expect to see in assessment growth for the 10-year period from now going back 10 years is about 4.6% right now. But a few years ago, that percentage was closer to 3.5% to 4%. But because we've had some bigger years lately, the average is going up a lot, or more than what the old average was. So now we are budgeting a 4.6% increase in assessments over the next couple of years based on what our history has been. But we can have good years and we can have bad years. And it wasn't more than 10 years ago when we had a year that actually property assessments went down. But with the growth that Ann Arbor is seeing and some inflationary impacts also affecting property tax assessments, that's a benefit to us. And so that's how we're making our projections. And from there, this is the revenue that's most offsetting our cost pressures because it's continuing to grow. And like I said, it's at a little bit of a higher rate than what we would have projected a few years ago. However, we're seeing cost pressures on the other side of that. So where there's growth in assessments due to inflationary impacts, there are also expense pressures. And so fuel is one of the most volatile things we've been watching throughout the year. I don't think I have to talk too much about that. I think we all experience it. But this is how it looks for us at TheRide. So the blue, everything left of the vertical dashed line is what we've currently been paying for fuel throughout the last year. As you move over to the right side, this is what we're projecting, and this is how we're projecting fuel will go. The dashed horizontal line that is orange on the right is the average that we're expecting to pay over the next year. And you can see that it's significantly higher than the average on the left. So the dashed blue line on the left is the average of what we've been paying all year. And with spot prices the way they are, up kind of at the high range there, we're projecting that's going to continue through October. We are projecting that it will taper off a little bit throughout the year, and that so we're not expecting to stay at the highest point for a whole nother year. We know there will be fluctuations, so we're building that into our assumption, and we're budgeting right now the dashed line, which is 405. The source for the projections, or what's giving us this trajectory for projections, is the EIA, and that's what the Scan Me is at the bottom. So if you wanted to see the source that we're using, you could scan that QR code. It'll take you right to the governmental page that we use to make projections. That's the best information we have, and we'll have to watch it throughout the year, but we feel that this is responsible budgeting. Another cost pressure significantly impacted, and we've talked about this a little before, is related to fleet maintenance and maintaining the fleet. We've talked, I think, at length about the cost of buses going up dramatically. This is the cost of maintaining those buses also going up dramatically. What this is intended to show you is historically where we've been for fleet maintenance. This is a combination of what we spend in operating and capital depending on what we buy or how we buy it. But those costs are significantly growing. The line in the graph is showing the PPI change year over year throughout this period of time, and you can see that our costs have very much trended with that. So our fleet hasn't changed dramatically, but the cost of maintaining the fleet is growing. I do also want to share that there's a portion of the increase that we're seeing in 26 and 27 that is a little bit of a maintenance bubble is how I'm choosing to describe it. We have buses that you can see we didn't do a lot of maintenance on for a few years during COVID. That's because they were parked. So we had significantly decreased service for a period of time. During that time, there were approximately 40 buses parked, which is a significant portion of our fleet. So it wasn't deferred maintenance, they just weren't being utilized. So no miles were being put on it and so on. So now we're at the point where obviously all those buses came into service a couple of years later. Now we've added service, so they're running, but we have like a split use where some of our vehicles have been used throughout the whole period and some of them weren't. And now those vehicles are kind of coming due in terms of needing engine replacements, and we're using rebuilt engines, remanufactured engines, and that sort of thing to replace them, but they're kind of all converging and coming due at the same time as the buses that would have been scheduled to do so. So the difference between the dark blue line and the light blue line or bar in FY 26 and 27 is the difference between what we would have expected on average to pay or to replace the costs related to those vehicles. And then the blue is sort of like the convergence or this bubble that we don't expect to last, but over time, it's something that we're going to take care of now, not defer it for later, just take care of it now, replace those engines, get everything where it needs to be as they age, so to get them through their useful life. And then we expect that bubble to come back down. So we don't view this as a long-term pressure. The inflation, that's a different part of that, but there is a part of that that's just having to kind of address maintenance on vehicles because now they're at the point where we'd want to do that. So to kind of summarize what's going on in the operating budget, we have a significant increase in revenues, which I have shared with you throughout the summer. Expenses are also going up, but we have the revenue for it. So we're taking care of our fleet and taking care of our assets and doing things that are responsible with the funding that we have, and able to present a balanced budget even in the face of difficult cost pressures and inflation because of the revenue that we're generating. Then I want to move into the capital budget, but I'm comfortable just pausing for a minute. If anybody wants to talk anything about that, you can certainly answer more questions later, but it might be a good time to take a pause.
Travis?
Coming my way. So while we're on this slide, the fleet maintenance costs here. So I'm understanding the COVID bubble, and I think you're saying that plus 1.9 million is kind of the making up for the lost service that we're seeing. But if I look at that total, that looks like almost triple the amount. And in 2020 and 2021, it looks like the delta between what we had been spending before that was about like 500,000, 0.6. How do we get all the way up to 2 if we're kind of like 1.1, 1.2 that
question.
we've saved? Like, what's that expansion look like? Almost double what I would expect if it was just making up for that bubble.
Yeah, I think the blue is a combination of inflation because it's the expected cost of the bubble, which is inflated, as well as it's just higher than what we normally would have expected to spend on a normal rate of inflation. So I think it's kind of two things mixed in one, which is why it seems so much larger. But if you look at the notes on the right, are really intended to kind of share a little more detail about how that number comes together. So we have different ways that we're addressing the maintenance, and that is demonstrated in those different buckets. So that might give you a little more understanding of how that's changing and why it's maybe intuitively offhand a little bit more than you would have thought.
Do you have a follow-up? Go ahead.
So with it being such an expansion in cost for this year, is that made up by the increase in revenues that we're getting from like millage capture
Yes.
and from the state? Or do we need to seek other sources to offset that high?
No, we have the revenue for that. It is both. So For every eligible expense that we have, which everything in this category would be eligible, we will get 30% for this, or 29.9% from the state. So we're getting more revenue from that. And then the additional revenue would be made up with the increases in the millage funding that I showed you earlier.
Got it.
So there's no deficit from this at all. And that's, sometimes there are ways we could spread that out a little bit more or something like that. But in this case, we have the revenue, and we feel that the sooner we take care of this and get these buses taken care of, actually it's going to save us money because we won't have to be repairing them as often and kind of working them through. We can get them fixed now with the revenue that we have. So not deferring something that we know is something we have to handle.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Susan?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my question has to do more about presentation. On the page with ridership, you show actual numbers. We show $4 million in anticipated revenues with basically 4 million rides. Then as we go forward, we're getting percentages. And what I'm interested in is we're now 2 years into our plan. We had the voters vote, was it 22? New services were put on the street in 24. This is a chance to begin to see what our new expenses are versus the ridership. Is there a way that instead of percentages, we can also have actual numbers showing on the graphs as well? So that, again, I'm interested because there was an argument that the way to grow ridership is to put more service on the road. But for the costs we incurred, what I think at some point before we ever have a discussion about increasing the millage, I think we should go back and actually take a look. Maybe it shouldn't have been as much for evening, or maybe it shouldn't have been as much for holiday, or it didn't have to be 15-minute service. I mean, I'd like to begin to get a little bit more detailed on what did we get for the amount that we increased our millage. What is the ridership? So as we begin to monitor expenses, it's apples against apples, the service and ridership. So again, following pages after that first page, we get into percentages. It'd be great to actually have the actual numbers so we can begin to look at what does 25 look like, what does 26 look like, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I do want to share that there are more specific numbers in the budget document, and we do break down ridership in the budget document several different ways where you can see that. But I think what you're referring to is maybe more of a metric on.
Or a side-by-side.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sort of an old hand at things like our parking system. What was the expense to running the parking system? What were the revenues from parking system? You could actually see it side by side.
Okay.
And really get a sense of where can we be doing some fine tuning? And I think that later discussion, we're not in that discussion this year, but down the road, I think it'll set us up for having that discussion.
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate your comments. I also do want to say that on this graph, this bar chart, you can actually see how ridership did grow in the period that you mentioned, that we did increase our services. So from 23 to 24 to 25, there was a significant improvement in ridership. And I think what we're seeing in 26 is just kind of a leveling off. It's a little bit of a dip, but it's pretty close to where it was last year. And so it's kind of just what we're thinking is more of a leveling off. And then with small growth from that going forward, kind of like we had before we implemented new services. So if this chart did go farther back, what it would show is that for a few years, there was a drop during COVID, and then there was a rebound and slight increases. And then the increase with the new service was a little bit greater. And then we thought it might grow again. But I think some of you may remember a discussion we had back then where we said the new ridership the ridership from the new services grew faster than we expected. From 24 to 25. And so we were, kind of projecting that again for 26. And what we're really seeing is that we saw a majority of that growth really quickly, or all of it really quickly, and then a little bit of leveling off. So just to kind of explain that a little bit further. Yeah.
going down if our millage was increasing as a percentage of budget.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. You're welcome. Thanks for
Any
the
other
comments.
questions or comments? Simi?
Thanks, Dina.
You're welcome.
On the graph showing fuel prices and the budget, you talked about pulling numbers from the EIA. I just wonder, my understanding is we buy in bulk and under certain contracts or
Yeah.
procurement agreements. Is that why we're seeing like flat for a quarter? Is that we pay a flat price per quarter? And is that taken into account, or are we just taking the numbers straight from that source?
Yeah, it's closer to the source than it is trying to estimate from month to month how it would go, or from week to week. We do have fuel contracts. We're in the process right now of updating our new fuel contract. And what that does is it allows us to buy from a provider that offers us the best price at that time. So we're not always buying from the same supplier, but we're buying from the supplier with the best price at the time. And for budgeting purposes, we look more at the projections and try to just do it essentially by quarter of like, this is what we expect it to be over the year based on that. Yeah.
Any other questions? Seeing none, Dina, we can move on.
Thank you very much for your questions. And I'll move on into the capital budget. And I guess I should have said this earlier in the presentation. Your draft budget book has a significant amount of detail. And my door is open for questions throughout the budget process. After the budget gets approved, anytime that you have questions about the budget, please reach out. I'm happy to do that. So let's move on and talk about a little bit more about the capital budget. The capital budget, the way we program our budget is by priority. Typically, we look at available funding for capital items. We have significant sources of funding from the federal and the state government, which I'll talk about in more detail. But the first thing that's required to do is to make sure we maintain all of our current assets in a state of good repair. That's an FTA term. That is officially something that we are required to do because we get money to do that from the federal government through grants. It has to be our highest priority. So we're not going to start new things or try to expand what we have unless we know we can maintain our current state or our state of good repair on our current assets. So how this is laid out is just to kind of share with you how the priorities go, how much we're spending in fiscal 27 or planning to spend in fiscal 27 in each of these categories, and give you some specifics about each of those categories. This is not all inclusive, and as I mentioned before, in the budget book, there are very detailed explanations about every project in our capital plan and a more detailed capital plan. I just want to kind of hit the highlights of how we do it and what is generally in that plan today and in my presentation. So like I said, we start with state of good repair, and then we look at the things we have and we say, how can we enhance or leverage those resources to improve, or what are things that just need to be improved? We have things that we just look at it and realize we need to make it a little bit better. So those are more called value added. I will say that sometimes value added gets mixed in with state of good repair. For instance, when we're going to repair something or replace something that's come to its full useful life or beyond its useful life, we would look at it and say, is there a value add here that we can get when we're replacing it? And we don't specifically separate those costs in the capital plan. We do, however, review them internally in terms of, do we want to replace this in like kind, or is there an initiative to make something better? And usually what happens is if there's a significant cost impact of adding something, or there's an opportunity to do that, that would be reviewed as an initiative in the initiative process and built into the cost of that if it gets approved. And usually then that would become part of the state of good repair cost. So it's not 100% pure from bucket to bucket here, but I just wanted to, share with you that we do go through that process whenever we're replacing, especially a significant cost item, to look at how we can make sure we're complying with board policies, either from enhancing it for the public, if there's an energy sustainability opportunity, everything that we think about the board's policies and consider that when we're making those changes. And then last, we have service expansions, and you'll see significant project in this category for the YTC. And this is also an example of what I just mentioned. It's time to replace the YTC because of the age of it, and we've really used it to its capacity. We're also expanding it. We're also improving the movement of the vehicles in the area. It's not just a new building. We're not just replacing the building. We're building capacity. So we're putting it under expansion, but there's a component of that that would normally fall under state of good repair. But in this case, because we're enhancing it so significantly, it's going to be a brand new building. It's going to have a completely different layout, allow for expansion, both in terms of the buses themselves and service and frequencies, but also for capacity for passengers. So that's under expansion because it's such a significant growth opportunity and expansion that's why we put it there. So that's just an example of how sometimes some of these things go together and we pick an opportunity. The other thing about expansion of services is typically the projects in this category are not things that we would be able to fund with our state of good repair funding or the funding, what we call formula funding. So the grant funding that we get to maintain what we currently have would not usually cover the expansion of services. It's not going to cover a large $20 million project because we only get about $10 million a year in the money to replace what we currently have. So we couldn't take all of that money and put it towards one project. We have to do both. So typically when we're looking at expansion projects, we're thinking generation of new revenue sources, more grants, partnerships, anything we can do to fund the projects that are in the long range plan. So here's a little summary of our capital projects by category, similar to what you just saw on the top, but on the bottom, including the funding sources, how we're funding both the fiscal year 2027 budget, which you can see is fully funded. So the light blue column is representative of what we're anticipating to spend on capital projects in fiscal year 2027. You can see at the very bottom, there's 0% unidentified funding for that year. So for the activities that we plan to undertake next year, we are fully funded. And then for the projects going through the rest of the capital plan, we are not fully funded. You can see we have a large unidentified funding at the bottom, and that's not meant to be scary. That's just meant to be a challenge for us to meet. The capital plan is very robust. It has a lot of longer term projects like potentially the BRT, and other projects, a maintenance garage, a maintenance facility. And as I said before, those are expansions, so they're not things that we can just use the funding we have, and we're going to have to work really hard to get funding. We've been very successful in the past few years getting funding for our projects, and because of that, we're moving the YTC forward, which is the biggest change in the budget for fiscal 27 versus 26. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But the far column on the right shows 45% unidentified funding, and again, that's just what we're planning to work towards throughout the next few years. The funding sources as a whole and as a percentage are over on the right, so you can see how we're funded. We're basically funded with federal formula grants, congressional directed spending for fiscal 27, and we get a 20% state match on capital projects, which I just want to mention is really great for the state of Michigan, and it's not like that in every state. So just note that those budgets that the MDOT is passing includes funding for that 20%, and we're really grateful that the state is continuing to be able to do that. It makes it a lot easier because sometimes we would have to come up with our own local share and not be able to use the state's funding. So that's a big deal for us. Just wanted to point that out. Just want to touch on the YTC and some of the impacts of the budget approval. So even though we're asking you to approve a one-year budget for fiscal year 27 spending, there are projects that span multiple years. The YTC is the biggest example of that. We've already started spending money on that through planning and design. And in 2027, you can see there's a much bigger funding need for the construction. We'll be finishing design, starting construction and finishing construction in 2027. So just wanted to share that while we're only asking for 1 year of funding, there are, it implicates what could move forward. There is another step that will happen with the board before we move into the construction phase. We will need the board's approval per board policy to move forward with construction, but this sets up the budget and the funding associated with that project such that you can be assured that when we start a project, we have the funding planned for it beyond the fiscal year you're approving. It is programmed in the capital plan, and it's demonstrated here for you just to get a feel for what that looks like over the next 3 years. So when we come to you for approval, you'll know that we A, have the funding, and B, have incorporated that into the capital plan, which you'll, like I said, approve hopefully in September. And then to just kind of round out the capital projects section, just wanted to show the variance from year to year in what we plan to spend in our capital program from 26 to 27. By and large, the biggest increase is related to the YTC. So the biggest change is the YTC. We do have another major project in IT, and again, when you look at the budget detail, you can kind of see these variances in the table that's in the budget book. But we have an IT project where we're looking to replace our ITS system, our intelligent transportation system. So monitors, customer facing, big project going on for that. Right now, that's budgeted for next summer. So we'll watch that project closely, and hopefully we can get that done next summer. But that is also budgeted. So those are the probably two biggest changes or differences between what we budgeted for fiscal 26 and what we're budgeting for fiscal 27. I think I touched on more detail on that in the last time, and there's definitely more detail in your book, but I'm happy to answer any questions about that. So before I finish out and just talk about the projections and cash flow, to make sure that to demonstrate how we're funding all of these things and that we have adequate funding for it, are there more questions about the capital plan?
Don't laugh at me, Pravina. It should just be assumed. Question on our first slide in the capital budget. So capital budgeting by priority. Under state of good repair, that third bullet point is engines, transmissions, and bus components.
Yep.
How is that section different from the fleet maintenance budget,
Great
bucket
question.
that we talked about in the operating budget?
Yeah, so we can buy engines different ways. When we buy engines or transmissions that are brand new, typically we would buy them with capital funding. They're more expensive, it's a bigger investment, and we would buy them through what we call our capital funding or state of good repair funding. They're also significantly more in cost because we have to meet Buy America requirements. So it can increase the cost of the engine by as much as 30% if we use that. Typically, we do use that, and that's why that line is in here. And you'll see that line in the budget as well. But you won't see it going up significantly year over year because the engines we're planning to address in the next 2 years, this year and next year, are going to be remanufactured or rebuilt engines, and those don't, since we're using operating funds, do not have the same requirements as is required to use the capital funding. So we will still replace some engines with new engines. So for good example is some of those buses that we parked, they're still aging as they're parked, right? So we don't want to put a brand new engine in a vehicle that's actually past the normal time period that we would replace the engine because it sat still for a few years, right? Because we're going to dispose of that bus sooner than the other buses. And so some of the buses that are more on track with this is the time we would normally replace them, they would be purchased this way through the capital because that's like a normal replacement cycle. We budget for so many with our grant funds and we use that. But for these other ones, that is not a very good way to use the funds. And if we have that, we could do it, but if we better leverage the operating funds that we have, we can buy them cheaper and take care of this with less money overall.
Follow-up? It's not a follow-up, it's a new question, so
Okay,
if
go
they're,
for
okay. next slide after that, on the capital budget being fully funded. So I know you had talked about the 45% number and the 211 million that's unidentified funding. And I know that's in the future, and we're going to look to that in the future. But if I just pull on that thread a tiny bit, and maybe my math is terrible, so that's why I'm asking. I'm guessing that that is the 8-year aggregate that we're talking about, right? 2028 through 36.
Yeah, that's the rest of the capital plan.
So if I'm looking at the state and federal grants that we have budgeted for that 8-year period at 229 million, and then the unidentified funding at 211, it looks like per year that averages out to about 28.6 million in grants projected and 26.5 million in unidentified funding.
Okay.
So if I'm looking at the difference between what we got in grants this year, or what we're projecting for state and federal grants for our capital budget this year at 35, that delta is around like $7 million.
Yes.
But if I'm looking to the future 8 years, that delta is more like $20 million.
Yeah.
Are we concerned about?
No.
That's a lot. That's a much bigger delta.
It's a really astute question.
Okay.
Which I do have an answer for. So for 2027, we're not using just formula funding. We're using discretionary funding. And I'll use the YTC as the primary example because that's what's driving the 27 budget, and that's what's driving the additional funding. That project is 80% funded with federal funds, federal earmarks, or CDS, which is congressionally directed spending. In future projects, we do not assume 80% funding from the federal government. We can't, because discretionary programs don't offer 80%. It just happens that for this project, we were able to generate enough earmarks and additional discretionary money that we can pay for this project 100% without using any of our direct own funding. So the percentage of revenue that we're planning in 27 is significantly higher, but we wouldn't be able to plan that for every project in the capital plan for the future. Now, if we can get it, we're going to try for it. And right now what's programmed in is 50% CIG funding, which is a different source of discretionary funding, which we would use, which we will be going for. Now that can fund more than 50%, but we don't know that for sure. And when whatever we get from the federal government gets matched 20% by the state. So roughly, if you had a project that was 50% funded by federal, you'd get a 20% match on that. So we'll just say for rounding that's 70%. We'd still have to come up with 30% from another source or get more grant funding some other way, or we'd have to use our reserve, our capital reserve. So what our goal will be is to generate more than that, but we just can't, we don't know, and it's unidentified right now. So some of that unidentified funding will turn into, hopefully, more federal funding. We just can't program that because we don't know.
Got it.
That's why.
So if I ask it another way, that same logic holds, because if I add up what we're essentially looking at, is that we're going to have to, per year, have about 55 and change $million in capital costs per year over an 8-year stretch.
Yes.
And if we're looking at this year being 45 million, and that was pretty darn good for what we got from the feds.
Yes.
Again, are we concerned? We're not concerned that there's still 10 kind of, if we have this year happen over 8 years, we're still 10 short every year.
What will happen is we would have to reprioritize our projects.
Okay.
So right now, the capital plan reflects the long-range plan. The timing of our projects matches what has been approved by the board in the long-range plan. That's our goal. If we don't get there, if we can't get the funding, then we would probably have to defer projects, reprioritize projects, do whatever we need to do with the revenue that we have. And there's time to work through that over the years.
Okay. Thank you.
Great questions.
Any other questions? Seeing none?
Okay. Thank you. So part of what we're required to do is to make sure that the board understands that we can afford our budget, not just for next year, but over the next several years, right? We don't want to make decisions today and be looking at a short-term window and cause any kind of a financial problem. And the only way to really protect ourselves against that is to make projections and make sure that we're spending within our means, not only this year and the next year, but the year after that and for several years to come. So this slide shows projected revenues and expenses over what we're calling the projection period, which is about 7 years into the future. It takes the current budget that we've presented tonight and that we'll be planning to bring to you in September, and it has escalations as we see them for revenues and expenses based on everything we know and all the research that we've done today. It assumes that there's a renew and restore millage. So it assumes that we're going to get 2.38 mils in our next millage cycle and maintain that through the projection period. This is a slide. I think that's very important to demonstrate what we've talked about before, which is that we do believe that if we don't execute the next phase of the long range plan, we would be able to live within our means through this projection period. That's a big if, and that's ultimately a decision that will be made, but for right now, those are the assumptions that are going into this projection. And then I also like to kind of broaden that scope a little bit and take a step back and say, where were we back in 2011? Where are we today, and where are we going? So this is, if you looked at 2026 out or 2025 out, it looks pretty similar to what you just saw in a bigger way. But this kind of shows you where we've been in the past. That we did at one point have a deficit or a structural deficit that we corrected with our millage. And it shows that since then, we have certainly been able to recover, maintain where we're at, maintain the fiscal responsibility to keep us sound financially into the future. And you can't really talk about budgeting or spending or anything without talking about cash, because at the end of the day, you can budget a lot of things, but you need to make sure that the cash is in the bank, you can pay the bills when they come, that your reserves are funded. And so this is a kind of a culmination of everything that we've shared. This is also in the budget book, and there's some more detail in there, but it shows that yesterday, today, and through the projection period, we will have enough cash at the right time, maintain all of our reserves, except it does deplete the capital reserve. So the big change that you're seeing from 29 to 30 to 31 is what would happen if we decided to move forward with our projects without additional funding. And that would mean that that reserve would be depleted as early as 2030 or 2031. So we don't want to give anyone the impression that while we have this capital reserve, it's not spoken for. It is spoken for. We have many projects. We have unidentified funding. Our choice is to leverage this funding to try to get additional funding. And as you can see, we've been very successful in that the past few years. As I mentioned, we're fortunate to have received enough grants for the YTC that we can fully fund that project without touching our reserve. But we wouldn't necessarily be able to do that without having the reserve, because that gives confidence that there's funding available for projects when we need to have it for the feds to say, look, they're handling things responsibly, they can afford these projects, and we know that if we give them the money, they're going to get it done. So this assumes that it would go away, but that's not what we intend to do. But if it did, that's what this would look like. But you can see that the operating reserves and the cash for operations are maintained throughout the projection period, even beyond if we were to spend the capital reserve. And with that, I want to kind of talk just a little bit about some of the opportunities and risks in our budget. We're in a very good fiscal situation. We are continuing and able to demonstrate that we're able to continue planned services to our communities that we have promised. We are executing on our long-range plan, and we have an approved millage through 2028 that keeps us stable. We have strong financial performance over the past few years, going back quite some time and going forward. We have fully funded reserves as required by the board, and we have no debt. Some of the risks that we are watching now, have been watching, will continue to watch, over time and potentially update as needed is what the state operating assistance is. As I mentioned, 30% is a lot. It's a big percent of our budget on the expense side, so we're always keeping track of what's going on in Lansing, advocating, putting resources towards that, demonstrating the need, and fortunately, we're in a very pro-transit state. Fuel price volatility, something that we, of course, have to watch. It does impact the budget. We have demonstrated that we've been able to weather difficult times with fuel prices, and if they improve dramatically, that's going to even put us in a better financial situation. But for now, we think we're budgeting at a level that is slightly conservative and responsible for being sure that we have the money that we need to operate. We are currently in labor negotiations, and when that gets completed, we'll know what that looks like. We have assumptions built into the budget that we would normally have, and we're managing to that to the extent we can. Health insurance renewals are something that happen every year, and we've seen some uptick in healthcare costs recently. We are working hard to try to manage those costs, and it's something that we want you to know is a risk, but something that we feel confident we can manage as we go through the budget year. Impacts of property tax deductions are something that's kind of an unknown. So as property taxes grow, we've been very fortunate in that, but we do know that there are some changes coming that can kind of deteriorate a little bit of the revenue we receive. However, there could be growth on the other side of that. So we're not exactly sure what that looks like. It's a small thing, but it can have a fairly significant impact over time. So we're mindful of that and watching that as information becomes available from the cities. And federal funding reauthorization is always something to think about, especially right now. We are in a new year, or we will be in a new year of reauthorization. It's not certain what will happen there. I think the biggest risk that we're watching with relation to that is during the COVID era. We still talk about it. During the COVID era, we got a significant increase in our, what we call our 5307 funding, which is our formula funding. So we used to get about $7 to $8 million a year for state of good repair. And during COVID, there was additional funding put towards that pot of money, and we've been receiving approximately $10 million. There's been discussions that will get rolled back now that COVID is in the rear view. And if that happens, we'll lose a significant amount of revenue for state of good repair. So we don't know that will happen. It is something that we're watching. It's a risk that I wanted to point out. Given the position we're in, I still feel confident we can work within it. But it is something that would impact even the future decisions about what we would need to maintain our assets if we have service expansions and things like that. So it's something that we're aware of. And we're keeping an eye on that. So just to summarize everything I talked about at a super high level, maintaining our service levels, strong income, no fare changes, managing cost pressures, providing a balanced budget for the next fiscal year, and demonstrating financial feasibility over the projection period. For those of you who don't have the packet in front of you or the public, we do have our budget materials online on our website. It looks like this. It's under performance. So the draft budget is available online. There's a budget at 2700 South Industrial where you can walk in and see what the budget looks like. And once our budget comes in September, we'll also be posted and the final, so we'll update it throughout the budget process. And then the next steps in our process to kind of round out our evening here, unless there are more questions at the end, is this is kind of we're zeroing in on our target, and our target is to have an adoption of the budget in advance of our new fiscal year, which starts October 1. So tonight we have this presentation. We have an official public hearing that we're going to have next. Throughout between now and the end of September, still open public comment period, even though there's an official public comment tonight. We take comments through the whole budget process right up until about a week before we have to present to the board or put the budget materials out to the board the week before the board meeting in September. And we'll be finalizing those adjustments, making any final tweaks. If there are any, if there's anything significant to report, I'll be reporting it through committees as soon as we become aware of it. It's unlikely, but it could happen. And if there are any major changes, I'll be highlighting those in September before we ask for approval. And that concludes the presentation that I have prepared for you, but I am happy to answer any more questions now or later. Yes.
Pravina?
My question was about your, oh, I'm sorry. My question was about your last statement. So if, as we're open for the next, I guess, almost month of public commentary, or how can people in the public submit it? Is it on the website where there's a link? They could do an online form, or do they have to come in person?
Yes, there is a link on the website. There's a phone number that they can call that's also, I believe, posted on the website. Jeff, correct me? Okay. And we did put out a public press release in July, kind of informing the public that we are in the middle of our budget process, asking for comments and questions if there are any. I'm not aware of any to date, but communications is always keeping an eye out for those and forwarding those on, in addition to any questions or comments from the board. Thanks, Jeff.
Any other questions? Travis?
On the cash position slide, I just wanted to understand the assumption comment that you were making, that
Sure.
when the capital reserve is going down there, is that kind of hearkening back to the conversation we just had where we're not able to gap fill, so we're just dipping into capital reserve?
Right.
Or is that assuming, so it's assuming basically we stay level at 45, essentially 45 mil from state and federal grants? Or is that saying we don't get any state and federal grants and we've just got to use capital?
This uses the assumption, so this is what the cash flow would look like, using the assumption that we would get 50% for some of those larger projects, and then the 20% state match on top of that, and then that extra roughly 30%, it's not 30% in math, but close, would be coming out of capital reserve, which is why it would be depleted so quickly. But again, that's not how we really plan to use it, but I wanted to be clear that this funding is spoken for in our capital plan.
Perfect. That's very helpful. I was just trying to understand the assumption there. And if I could ask one more question, and it's not on these slides, it's on the larger budget book. But
Okay.
We talked a little bit about revenues being up, and I think it's revenues up 7.4 million, expenses up 6.6. So
Right.
we're balanced and we're doing good on those kind of increases. We talked about state and federal. We talked about tax collection. In terms of POSAs, I see in here, I think it's on page 36, we're assuming a 4% increase on those contracts.
Yes.
Am I correct in assuming that's increased revenue that we're getting from those POSA agreements at a 4% increase from each one of them?
Yes.
Okay.
So the POSAs are based on the expenses or a cost recovery model of what it costs to recover expenses. So when we look at the POSAs and to determine, typically what we do is increase them basically by the rate of inflation. And the rate of inflation is toggling right around 4%. You can see that our costs are going up significantly more than that because some of the higher expense items that affect service, fuel, maintenance costs, those things, you can see them increasing way more than 4% in our budget. So that has an impact. So the inflationary factor would consider which costs are going into service, and that would be on the high end of the normal level of inflation. So like, I think there was an inflation level was at 3.5% a few weeks ago. The POSAs came out to about 4% because some of those cost impacts are much higher that directly impact the cost of service.
Got it. So that makes sense to me.
Budgeted
Yeah.
for here.
And that's what it's budgeted for here.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other? Susan?
My questions have to do with ridership.
Okay.
They're sort of twofold. One, I'm back to the slide where we're projecting a slight growth in ridership, yet I didn't hear anything in the budget about an investment in trying to draw new riders. Last year, there was a lot of content about an ad campaign and so forth. I didn't hear anything in the budget about how we're going to draw the ridership. And then the second half of the question is, with all this construction, how solid do you think the ridership projection is, given that Blake right now has us down the street? I'm sure there's impacts to riders. Ipsy will soon be under construction. There's the impact of our own construction, not just the construction of the private sector. So I just want to understand a little bit more about how you've arrived here. Again, not seeing anything about an investment and drawing new riders and the disruption that we're going to see.
Okay, so I'm going to give a broad comment and then open the floor to my colleagues if they want to add, since we didn't create the ridership projections, but I just want to touch on a couple things first and then open it up for some additional comments if there are any. Generally speaking, one of the biggest investments we can make in trying to grow ridership is maintaining our services, on-time performance, doing the things that we do well every day. So while there may be specific communications opportunities that are maybe reviewed or initiatives, I didn't touch on those, but those are the things that a majority of our budget goes to. So we are continually putting money into trying to improve services, and a lot of the things that you see in the budget will reflect that. So I just want to share that that's a major focus for us, making sure that we're able to provide the service efficiently, effectively, on time, and continually. From there may be additional incentives. I do believe that ridership would consider any known impacts of changes with construction. And as you can see, while we are expecting a little bit of growth, we're not projecting significant growth for a couple of reasons. We're not anticipating any increased frequencies or new services, for one, and for two, we are experiencing the impacts right now of significant construction in Ann Arbor. We recognize that'll be a factor in Ypsilanti as well. And our current ridership reflects those changes this year already. So we do feel that we have a fairly good handle on what's happening with ridership right now and what will happen. And from there, if there's anything more specific that I missed or don't know about that anyone wants to comment on my team, I'm opening it up to you. Okay.
I'll add on.
Okay.
I think almost all the spending in the budget, ultimately one way or another, is in pursuit of ridership. Whether it is maintaining our ridership, which is, it costs a lot more to get a new rider than it does to keep an old one. And there's a lot of spending directed towards that, as Tina said. But there's also continuing the ad campaign, for example. Like, it was new a few years ago, but it'll continue to evolve. And I know Jeff's got a whole plan for that. Things like the YTC, I don't think we should underestimate the importance of that as a ridership attraction tool. We don't talk about it necessarily, but that's our front door in Ypsilanti. And if you look at a retail operation, like an Apple store, they don't say, oh, the last people in this small shop had a pretty good decor, we're just going to keep the same thing and throw our stuff. No, they rehash the whole thing. I think things like the YTC, other projects that are in the business plan include things like the fare study, fare collection, trying to make fare collection more frictionless, if you will. Perhaps we need to reconsider our pricing. All these things are there. They're just in various stages of development. I think what we're seeing in this year's budget is a huge focus on the YTC construction, because that's just the single biggest project that's moved through the pipeline to date. So I think there's a lot in here. We didn't focus the presentation that way. If that had been an emphasis, it probably would have looked a little bit different. But I think almost everything in here, one way or another, goes to that goal.
I think I was looking more at the budget. So if we're under construction in Ipsy, down the road, it will have an impact. I'm sure
Yes.
it'll be attractive. But there's disruption in the coming year, and I'm just trying to test the number that we're balancing a budget on, that in fact we'll see that ridership, despite our
Sure.
own construction as well as the other. I was looking to see if there was anything else in there about drawing new riders. That's always for me the bottom line. So
I do
along
think-
those lines.
Yeah, no, thank you for the clarification. Forrest, I think we anticipated in ridership projections the impact of the BTC relocation. Have we been able to sort of guesstimate what the impact of because I'm not sure we have, I think the last I heard, the YTC would be remaining open during construction and we would just be shifting the platform around. So I don't know if there is a ridership impact there, but Forrest, can you enlighten us any?
Sure. BTC, we already have some experience. So we have the ridership built in, this year and the next year. YTC, we don't anticipate as significant impact because we have a lot more room to work with. We got a parking lot. Hopefully we'll sign agreement soon. So we have a much larger space to work with, unlike downtown Ann Arbor. So there is going to be a minor impact, but overall, I think we talk about when we do ridership projections, we look at the bigger picture, the trend, the student enrollment, some new development, and of course, some new development may have a negative impact on ridership, like the student dorms, right? So we do, look at it last year and this year, and then project next year. So those are kind of I would say any projection is our best estimate at this moment based on the information we have. Like, for example, last year, we project our ridership going up quite significantly because seeing the trend especially with the new service, we got really good reaction from our community after we introduced a lot more services. But unfortunately, that's it. Typically, you gradually get new riders. But certainly, I think Jeff did a great job for communication. People know and they react to it. So that projection did not materialize. But we try to be conservative on the projection side. But again, a lot of things could happen. Like construction, for example, we do see significant impact on our ridership when buses on a bigger detours. We try to build in those impact, but again, it's a very high level estimate. Yeah. But good question.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add to that, it's a very astute question because I think some of the things that happen we're shifting resources. So we talked about the significant effort for the BTC, that won't have the same lift next year as it had this year, but those resources will be then shifted to communications for what's happening at the YTC. So while it didn't appear as a budget initiative because there's not an additional budget cost in the presentation and in the way maybe we presented some of the materials, it's there, just maybe not as transparently as what you're asking. So I've made a note and I appreciate the question.
Any other questions? Travis?
It's not a question, just a kind of comment on this, and it's not for tonight because I don't think there is an answer to it. It's more just for us in the future to keep in mind, whether it's communications, whether it's, as we see the expenditures come into new services or something, kind of an ROI analysis on how that is impacting, I guess, to Susan's point, ridership, where I can see we increased communication spend this year by X dollars, and we saw ridership increase by X or Y based on, any of those metrics that we might have. I'm thinking about even just in terms of, and I know that we're now verging out of your department, Dina, so sorry.
You're all good. You're all good.
Or social media platforms, that kind of, you can see a little bit of the data analytics behind that. I think that in a future presentation might be really helpful for us too, particularly as we move forward on where do we focus our spending and priorities for years to come. What's giving us that kind of impact, because ridership is an important metric, I think would be helpful for us to see as we're trying to vision that out.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I just have a comment, and it's just a comment. I noticed in this brochure, in the operating budget and capital, a lot of the assets in terms of images look like are from 6 years ago. And I'm wondering if there is any new images of people riding the bus that are not wearing masks.
Yes, thank you for asking. We'll incorporate that. It's something we were thinking, literally thought of it like, throughout and just haven't gotten there yet, but I appreciate the comments.
Yeah, I'm hoping also to bank on what she said is that maybe we could have some persons with disabilities in there as well. That would be
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Dina?
Just to jump off what you're saying, people with disabilities, but I also think that there's an opportunity to have images of people using their bikes or different ways that they use the system, or even TheRide or whatever we're using. It's just a great opportunity to tell our entire story.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you so much, Dina.
You're welcome.
And now we will officially
Just gonna try
begin
to
3.1.1 public hearing for the
that out.
budget.
Okay.
And so I'll do this again, I apologize. In accordance with the Budget Hearings of Local Governments Act, local units are required to hold a public hearing on proposed budget. I will need a motion to suspend the regular board meeting and move to open the public hearing. Who would like to make a motion? Moved by Pravina, seconded by Susan. All those in favor, raise your hands. Very good, that passed unanimously. And I don't see anyone in the gallery, I don't believe. Deb, is there anyone online for public comment for the budget? Okay, so then we quickly do what we did last time and go back and to close the public comment on the budget. So they're concluded now, and I will need a motion to close the public hearing and resume the regular board meeting. Would someone like to make a motion? My motion by Simi, seconded by Susan. All those in favor, raise your hands. Very good, that was quite quick. Now we are going to go on to a different kind of vote because we are now moving into closed session pursuant to 8C of the OMA. We need to take a roll call vote to go into this closed session pursuant to 8C of the Open Meetings Act. This closed session is for strategy connected with the negotiations of a collective bargaining agreement, and we are now going to vote yes or no. Mr. Simivar?
Yes.
Mr. Rich Chang?
Yes.
Mr. Travis Ganyu?
Yes.
Ms. Julie Grand?
Yes.
Jesse's not here, sorry. Ms. Susan Pale? Ms. Pravina Ramaswamy? And I myself, Kathleen Mozak, am a yes, and we are now going over to across the hall for closed session. Are we set? So we are back and from our closed session, and we're going to vote to move out of that closed session. Yes or no responses. Mr. Rich Chang?
Yes.
Mr. Travis Ganyu?
Yes.
Ms. Julie Grand? Ms. Susan Pale? Ms. Pravina Ramaswamy? I, Chairwoman Mozak, am a yes. Mr. Simivar has stepped out, but we are still at quorum, so that vote just passed. Thank you, everyone. Moving on, ownership linkage, a verbal update from Rich Chang.
Yep, just a quick update. We are working on a moral owners linkage approach and strategy. A small group of us are working on that and then hope to have some plan that we can bring to committees. That's it.
Sounds good. We have not stopped the ownership linkage versus task force. It was sent to the governance committee or to relook at the wording and come back with something a little bit more definitive based on all of the feedback from last month's meeting. That will happen, I believe, at the end of August. Next on our agenda, the policy manual mock-up. There's an introduction on page 17. The staff, Matt and his staff, worked very hard on a new policy manual that has interesting diagrams and key key pictures and things like that that help to tell a story as you look at the policy manual, making it possibly more engaging. This is just an introduction. It's not a, there's no need for decision. So I'm going to turn this over to Matt to give us more information about this interesting policy manual. And the governance committee already looked at this. That's why it's coming to the board.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this certainly is not the most weighty issue that we have before it, so please consider it a palate cleanser for your board meal. Policy governance is a very helpful governance model, but it certainly does come with a steep learning curve. And one thing, we're always looking for ways to help board members be successful, and one idea occurred to us some time ago about perhaps the manual itself could be more user-friendly. And I will confess, I personally own a large collection of Idiot's Guide to Excel for Dummies books, and I find drawings very helpful sometimes. And so with a little bit of inspiration personally on that one, we thought, could a manual made entirely of text perhaps be more accessible for particularly new board members, and that's the target audience going forward, if it were a bit more accessible, if it had some graphics, if it had some flowcharts, if it had some process maps in it that might make it a little easier rather than relying strictly on the text. What you see here is a mock-up that staff created at my direction. We shared it with Governance Committee. They gave us some good initial feedback and it was adjusted based on that. What we'd like to do, I'm not sure this evening is full-time for it, we'd like to submit it to you for your consideration. I want to reiterate, this is not a final version. The board decides if this manual is edited or changed in any way. So please consider it an example of the kind of thing that might be possible. And other ideas and suggestions would be certainly welcome. If this is something the board finds helpful or can see being helpful for other new board members in the future, we might return to the governance committee to figure out a process that we could solicit your feedback, come up with another iteration of this for you to consider. And then finally, at the end, any changes to the manual are absolutely your decisions, not staff's. The intent here was not to adjust any of the content. This is an older version of the policy manual. It's already out of date. And we're not trying to change any of the content, any of the wording of the policies, just trying to make it easier to read. So with that, Madam Chair, we love to get some feedback if there is any tonight. But we think maybe something to sit with people and they can think about till the next meeting.
Okay, and before we get feedback, just to confirm then, that because this is a low priority, if board members have like compelling or anything that they would like to share with you, just zip you off an email or call you or whatever, because this is going to be a process, correct?
Yeah, we don't really have a firm timeline or a real process. Like, this is a very open-ended sort of thing,
Okay.
and very much we're interested in your reactions to this. If this is a waste of time, we'll put it in the circular
enough.
file.
Thank
But
you.
if it's helpful, continue the discussion.
Pravina?
Thank you. Something I want to just mention, I remember, I believe it was 2 meetings ago, we had an Ypsilanti at, I think Dina, you had done a presentation that was really informative of basically how does the system work? How does the sausage made? And that was, I think that's kind of missing here. This seems like a lot of policy of like, thou shalt not do this and that, and this is what we do. But an overview of how does this work and how do you operate and how do you get funds? I felt like that presentation you did was very, very easy to understand and digest. And then this feels to me kind of like additional content that we can read for like rules and regulations and how processes work. But I felt like what you had was a really good insight on how we get funding, how does it spent, what are the, so I just feel like thinking about that in a very visual way is also very accessible to many people.
Any other questions or comments tonight? Seeing none, thank you, Matt. And we'll go ahead and move on. Policy language discussion is not needed because we have not discussed any policies this evening. So with your indulgence, we will go ahead and move on to the fiscal year 26 quarterly 3 financial report. And that is Ms. Dina Reed again.
Thank you. I'll be brief. The quarterly report is in your packet. It was discussed in great detail at the Finance Committee meeting earlier this month. I will just hit some key highlights and then ask the board if they have any questions for the sake of time. We are on budget for fiscal year 2026 through the third quarter. Revenues are coming in a little bit stronger than budgeted. Expenses are coming in a little under, and the net of that is that we are favorable on the operating budget and expect the trends in here to continue through the end of the year. We are also in a good position with our cash reserves. No major changes on the balance sheet. All cash reserves, or all reserves are fully funded. Nothing has been used for operations. We are meeting our operating reserve balance target as well. It's above 2.0, and you can see that on the balance sheet, which is on page 21. No major changes in investment strategy, reinvesting any bonds or anything that comes due, we're just rolling back into investments, but no major changes to that strategy. And that concludes my overall summary of how things are going through the third quarter. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Dina on this report? Seeing none, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We will go ahead and move on to legislative updates. That's Mr. Jeff Pfeiffer.
I will also keep this brief. Biggest thing to report from last board meeting is the primary election did take place on August 4th. I believe I sent an election recap just to highlight we will have a mayoral change in the city of Ann Arbor, as well as a few changes in city council. In the city of Ypsilanti, there was a contested race for mayor. The incumbent, Mayor Brown, will remain, and no other changes on the Ypsilanti City Council. Kind of setting the stage, a lot of the focus will be on November. The Michigan State House will be in less than 10 days remaining for the session. They will likely cancel most of those. Folks are back home campaigning at this point. Setting up the gubernatorial race yesterday, or maybe it was 2 days ago now, Jocelyn Benson did name her lieutenant governor pick. It is Winnie Brinks, who currently serves as the Senate Majority Leader, and John James announced his pick a couple of weeks ago as Jay DeBoer, who's a state representative from the St. Clair area. So those both parties have their nominating conventions. The Republicans have theirs this Saturday, and I believe the Michigan Democrats have theirs next Saturday. That is the point where they will finalize the LG picks for the November election. But I think we've previously discussed a lot of different things will be on the ballot this year. We will have a change, governor, attorney general, secretary of state. On the federal side, looking at it, again, another continuing resolution, does not look like a budget will be passed in time. So I believe the next CR will fund the government through December. No major updates on reauthorization at this point or our congressionally directed spending. You'll remember we are still in play for a CDS with Senator Peters, with the caveat that Senator Peters will no longer be in office. He's not running for re-election, so his seat is up. So more to come on that. We'll see what transpires, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Jeff? Seeing none, thank you so much. We will move on to the CEO report. Matt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have one, I think, important thing to share with you in addition to what's in your packet. Several of us were upstate for our State Industry Association's annual meeting. Our association is the Michigan Public Transit Association, or the MPTA. Love our alphabet soup in this industry. And industry associations are very common. The road builders have one, the townships have one, and it helps in your advocacy efforts at Lansing to be able to speak as a sort of unified body. A challenge that our industry has had for many decades now has been that we have not been speaking with a unified voice. In 1992, there was a schism in the MPTA, and the mythology that had come down to me was that several smaller rural systems took exception to things the larger urban systems did, and that caused them to leave. And they left and created their own association, which was called Mass Trans. And there was a lot of personal acrimony and egos involved with this split. And I've been engaged in Michigan long enough that I do have personal memories of some of the individuals involved. And I'm like, yeah, I can see that. I can imagine how that might happen. Anyway, this has been a material weakness for our industry for ever since. That we would go speak, the MPTA would go speak to legislators, and a couple days later, mass trans would come, and it wouldn't necessarily be the same message. Sometimes they would be going like this. Over the years, many of the individuals from that original schism retired, moved on. The actual business reasons for it faded into memory and weren't really there, but what was left was sort of a inherited distrust. And some of you are aware, Jeff is now our representative on the board of the MPTA, but prior to him, it was myself for about 8 years, including 2 years as president. This is about 3 years back now. I was very proud this last week to hear a public announcement from President of the Association, Harmony Lloyd, that they have continued work that started when I was president, and we are now getting very close to an actual merger of the two associations and getting the band back together, if you will. This has been something, much as we heard earlier, readiness matters a lot. I want to give a lot of credit to the executive director of the MPTA, John Dulmus. He's been in the chair about 2 years, and I think his leadership and is modeling the kind of trustworthy behavior you would want from an association, along with a little fatigue, perhaps on the part of the other association, led them to say, you know, I think it's about time we could live in that association again. And so what we learned about upstate was that they have a letter of intent. They did some preliminary voting and sort of, in principle, we will move to bring you in on these terms. And it was, I think, a very good thing. So we are looking forward over the next year or two for that continuing to develop. I want to be clear, Mass Trans has been a great organization. They've done some things that the larger MPTA didn't do as well. So I see it as a really complementary development. They will strengthen each other. And the industry will once again be speaking with one voice inside of, I hope, a year. So that's a big development. And it's an example of sort of the long game, if you will. This is something that, again, started under my presidency several years back, was continued by my successor, who was in office for 2 years. And then her successor has been in office for about a year and just started her second term yesterday. So sometimes these things take time. A lot of diplomacy, a lot of sort of listening to the individuals, even if there's maybe not a rational business reason any longer, there can still be some residual distrust that needs to be ironed out over time. So that wasn't in my report because we just learned about it the other day, although I kind of heard about it. So I'm really excited about that, and we'll keep you up to speed on how it's going. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Yes, but the report that's in your binders, page 22, and what Mr. Carpenter had to say, is there any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to the action item recap. That's you, Ms. Deb Holt.
There it is. I only had one item, and that was just if anybody had any feedback after they've reviewed the policy manual mock-up, that they can send that to the CEO.
Sounds good. Thank you. Moving on, 9.2 topics for next meeting. We'll have budget approval in September. Fiscal year 26 quarterly 3 service report will be coming at us. We always pair financial planning and budgeting 2.4 with budget approval. That will also happen in September. Officer elections happen in September. That's the chair, the secretary, and the treasurer. And then coming in October will be formal, I believe, millage recommendation where we talk about it in public. Finally, we come to the public comment again. Deb, is there anyone online? Wonderful. Seeing none, we'll close that and move on to adjournment. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn? Moved by Rich, seconded by Pravina. All those in favor, raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Have a wonderful night, everyone.